In this video, we'll go over the top 200 drugs. Drugs are ordered by system and class as shown here. Timestamps can be found in the description for each section. These therapeutic groupings are based off of clinical pharmacology's medication hierarchy. Drugs are organized by generic name followed by brand, then class and indication. If the drug is a controlled substance, the schedule will appear as well. I provided a list of these drugs in the description if you'd like to follow along. In my next video, I'll go over tips, tricks, and techniques to learn this information efficiently. We'll start off with cardiovascular drugs. Benazepril or Lotensin is an angiotensin-converting enzyme or ACE inhibitor for hypertension, heart failure, and nephropathy. Lisinopril or Prinavil or Zestril is an ACE inhibitor for hypertension, heart failure, and nephropathy. Lisinopril with hydrochlorothiazide or Prinzide or Zestiretic is an ACE inhibitor with a diuretic for hypertension, heart failure, and nephropathy. Olmesartan or Benicar is an angiotensin II receptor blocker or ARB for hypertension, heart failure, and nephropathy. Valsartan or Diovan is an ARB for hypertension, heart failure, and nephropathy. Irbesartan or Avapro is an ARB for hypertension, heart failure, and nephropathy. Losartan or Cozar is an ARB for hypertension, heart failure, and nephropathy. Losartan with hydrochlorothiazide or Hyzar is an ARB with a diuretic for hypertension, heart failure, and nephropathy. Furosemide or Lasix is a diuretic for hypertension, heart failure, and edema. Spironolactone or Aldactone is a diuretic for hypertension, heart failure, and edema. Chlorthalidone or Thalatone is a diuretic for hypertension, heart failure, and edema. Hydrochlorothiazide or Microzide is a diuretic for hypertension, heart failure, and edema. Triamterene with hydrochlorothiazide or Maxide is a diuretic with a diuretic for hypertension, heart failure, and edema. Metoprolol or Lopressor or Toprol XL is a beta blocker for hypertension, heart failure, angina, and arrhythmias. Atenolol or Tenormin is a beta blocker for hypertension, heart failure, angina, and arrhythmias. Propranolol or Inderol is a beta blocker for hypertension, angina, arrhythmias, and anxiety. Carvedilol or Coreg is a beta blocker for hypertension, angina, and arrhythmias. Diltiazem or Cardizem is a calcium channel blocker for hypertension, angina, and arrhythmias. Verapamil or Calin is a calcium channel blocker for hypertension, angina, and arrhythmias. Amlodipine or Norvasc is a calcium channel blocker for hypertension and angina. Nifedipine or Procardia is a calcium channel blocker for hypertension and angina. Doxazocin or Cardura is an alpha-1 antagonist for hypertension and benign prostatic hyperplasia. Prazosin or Minipress is an alpha-1 antagonist for hypertension and benign prostatic hyperplasia. Clonidine or Catapress is an alpha-2 agonist for hypertension and ADHD. Hydralazine or Apresilene is a vasodilator for hypertension and heart failure. Digoxin or Lanoxin is a cardiac glycoside for heart failure and arrhythmias. Amiodarone or Cortisone is an antiarrhythmic for arrhythmias. Flecainide or Tambacor is an antiarrhythmic for arrhythmias. Nitroglycerin or Nitrostat is a nitrate for angina. Isosorbide or Imdur is a nitrate for angina. Apixaban or Eliquis is an anticoagulant for thromboembolism prophylaxis. Rivaroxaban or Xarelto is an anticoagulant for thromboembolism prophylaxis. Warfarin or Jantoven is an anticoagulant for thromboembolism prophylaxis. Clopidogrel or Plavix is a platelet aggregation inhibitor for thromboembolism prophylaxis. Aspirin or Ecotrin is a platelet aggregation inhibitor for thromboembolism prophylaxis. Atorvastatin or Lipitor is an HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor or statin for dyslipidemia. Rosuvastatin or Crestor is a statin for dyslipidemia. Simvastatin or Zocor is a statin for dyslipidemia. Lovastatin or Mevacor is a statin for dyslipidemia. Pravastatin or Pravachol is a statin for dyslipidemia. Gemfibrozil or Lopid is a fibrate for dyslipidemia. Fenofibrate or Tricor is a fibrate for dyslipidemia. Ezetimibe or Zetia is a cholesterol absorption inhibitor for dyslipidemia. Omega-3 acidyethyl esters or Lovaza is an omega-3 fatty acid for dyslipidemia. Brimonidine or Lumify is an alpha-2 agonist for ocular hypertension and glaucoma. Timolol or Betamol is a beta blocker for ocular hypertension and glaucoma. Latanoprost or Zalatan is a prostaglandin analog for ocular hypertension and glaucoma. Bimatoprost or Lumigan is a prostaglandin analog for ocular hypertension and glaucoma. Neurologic drugs. Sertraline or Zoloft is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor or SSRI for depression and anxiety. Fluoxetine or Prozac is an SSRI for depression and anxiety. Paroxetine or Paxil is an SSRI for depression and anxiety. Citalopram or Celexa is an SSRI for depression and anxiety. Escitalopram or Lexapro is an SSRI for depression and anxiety. Duloxetine or Cymbalta is a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor or SNRI for depression, anxiety, and neuropathy. Venlafaxine or Effexor is an SNRI for depression, anxiety, and neuropathy. Desvenlafaxine or Pristiq is an SNRI for depression, anxiety, and neuropathy. Amitriptyline or Elavil is a tricyclic antidepressant or TCA for depression, anxiety, neuropathy, and fibromyalgia. Nortriptyline or Pamelor is a TCA for depression, anxiety, neuropathy, and fibromyalgia. Mirtazapine or Remeron is a tetracyclic antidepressant for depression. Trazodone or Deseril is a serotonin receptor antagonist and reuptake inhibitor for depression and insomnia. Bupropion or Wellbutrin is a norepinephrine and dopamine reuptake inhibitor for depression and smoking cessation. Aripiprazole or Abilify is an atypical antipsychotic for depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Olanzapine or Zyprexa is an atypical antipsychotic for depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Quetiapine or Seroquel is an atypical antipsychotic for depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Risperidone or Risperdal is an atypical antipsychotic for bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. Lithium or Lithobid is a mood stabilizer for bipolar disorder. Lamotrigine or Lamictal is an anticonvulsant for bipolar disorder and seizures. Devalproex or Depakote is an anticonvulsant for bipolar disorder, seizures, and migraine prophylaxis. Topiramate or Topamax is an anticonvulsant for bipolar disorder, seizures, and migraine prophylaxis. Carbamazepine or Tegretol is an anticonvulsant for bipolar disorder and seizures. Oxcarbazepine or Trileptal is an anticonvulsant for seizures. Levetiracetam or Keppra is an anticonvulsant for seizures. Gabapentin or Neurontin is an anticonvulsant for seizures, neuralgia, and fibromyalgia. Pregabalin or Lyrica is an anticonvulsant for seizures, neuralgia, and fibromyalgia. Buspirone or Buspar is an anxiolytic for anxiety. Alprazolam or Xanax is a benzodiazepine for anxiety. Lorazepam or Ativan is a benzodiazepine for anxiety and seizures. Clonazepam or Klonopin is a benzodiazepine for anxiety and seizures. Diazepam or Valium is a benzodiazepine for anxiety, seizures, and muscle spasms. Zolpidem or Ambien is a sedative hypnotic for insomnia. Amphetamine with dextroamphetamine or Adderall is a stimulant for ADHD and narcolepsy. Methylphenidate or Ritalin or Concerta is a stimulant for ADHD and narcolepsy. Dexmethylphenidate or Focalin is a stimulant for ADHD. Lisdexamphetamine or Vyvanse is a stimulant for ADHD and binge eating disorder. Baclofen or gabapentin is a muscle relaxant for muscle spasms and pain. Cyclobenzaprine or Flexeril is a muscle relaxant for muscle spasms and pain. Tizanidine or Xanaflex is a muscle relaxant for muscle spasms and pain. Methocarbamol or Robaxin is a muscle relaxant for muscle spasms and pain. Acetaminophen or Tylenol is an analgesic for pain and fever. Tramadol or Ultram is an opioid agonist for pain. Morphine or MS-Contin is an opioid agonist for pain. Oxycodone or OxyContin is an opioid agonist for pain. Oxycodone with acetaminophen or Percocet is an opioid agonist with an analgesic for pain. Hydrocodone with acetaminophen or Norco is an opioid agonist with an analgesic for pain. Codeine with acetaminophen or Tylenol No. 3 is an opioid agonist with an analgesic for pain. Buprenorphine with naloxone or Suboxone is an opioid agonist-antagonist with an opioid antagonist for opioid use disorder. Sumatriptan or Imitrex is a serotonin receptor agonist for migraines. Rizatriptan or Maxalt is a serotonin receptor agonist for migraines. Pramipexole or Mirapex is a dopamine receptor agonist for Parkinson's disease and restless leg syndrome. Ropinirole or Requip is a dopamine receptor agonist for Parkinson's disease and restless leg syndrome. Carbidopa with levodopa or Sinemet is a decarboxylase inhibitor with a dopamine precursor for Parkinson's disease. Donepezil or Aricept is a cholinesterase inhibitor for Alzheimer's disease. Memantine or Namenda is an NMDA antagonist for Alzheimer's disease. Gastrointestinal drugs. Omeprazole or Prilosec is a proton pump inhibitor or PPI for gastroesophageal reflux disease or GERD. Esomeprazole or Nexium is a PPI for GERD. Pantoprazole or Protonix is a PPI for GERD. Lansoprazole or Prevacid is a PPI for GERD. Famotidine or Pepcid is a histamine H2 antagonist for GERD. Meclizine or Antivert is a histamine H1 antagonist for nausea, vomiting, and vertigo. Promethazine or Phenergan is a histamine H1 antagonist for nausea, vomiting, and allergies. Metoclopramide or Reglan is a dopamine receptor antagonist for nausea, vomiting, and gastroparesis. Ondansetron or Zofran is a serotonin receptor antagonist for nausea and vomiting. Docusate with Senna or Senna Plus is a stool softener with a laxative for constipation. Sucralfate or Carafate is a sucrose sulfate complex for ulcers. Mesalamine or Pentasa is an anti-inflammatory for ulcerative colitis. Dicyclamine or Bentyl is an anticholinergic for irritable bowel syndrome or abdominal pain. Phentermine or Adipex P is an appetite suppressant for weight loss. Folic acid or vitamin B9 is a supplement for folic acid supplementation. Ferrous sulfate or iron is a supplement for iron supplementation. Potassium chloride or Chlorcon is a supplement for potassium supplementation. Cholecalciferol or vitamin D3 is a supplement for vitamin D supplementation. Ergocalciferol or vitamin D2 is a supplement for vitamin D supplementation. Cyanocobalamin or vitamin B12 is a supplement for vitamin B12 supplementation. Respiratory drugs. Hydroxyzine or Vistril or Atarax is a histamine H1 antagonist for allergies, anxiety, nausea, and vomiting. Cetirizine or Zyrtec is a histamine H1 antagonist for allergies. Loratadine or Claritin is a histamine H1 antagonist for allergies. Azelastine or Estelin is a histamine H1 antagonist for allergies. Montelukast or Singulair is a leukotriene receptor antagonist for allergies and asthma. Benzonatate or Tessalon pearls is an antitussive for cough. Albuterol or Ventolin or ProAir or Proventil is a beta-2 agonist for asthma. Albuterol with ipratropium or Combivent or Duoneb is a beta-2 agonist with an antimuscarinic for asthma and COPD. Tiotropium or Spiriva is an antimuscarinic for asthma and COPD. Fluticasone or Flonase or Flovent is a corticosteroid for allergies and asthma. Fluticasone with salmeterol or Advair or Wixela is a corticosteroid with a beta-2 agonist for asthma and COPD. Fluticasone with vilanterol or Brioellipta is a corticosteroid with a beta-2 agonist for asthma and COPD. Budesonide with formoterol or Symbicort is a corticosteroid with a beta-2 agonist for asthma and COPD. Endocrine and genitourinary drugs. Metformin or glucophage is a biguanide for diabetes. Glipizide or glucotrol is a sulfonylurea for diabetes. Glimepiride or Amaryl is a sulfonylurea for diabetes. Pioglitazone or Actos is a thiazolidinedione for diabetes. Sitagliptin or Januvia is a dipeptidyl peptidase 4 inhibitor for diabetes. Empagliflozin or Jardiance is a sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitor for diabetes. Dulaglutide or Trulicity is a glucagon-like peptide 1 or GLP-1 receptor agonist for diabetes. Liraglutide or Victoza or Saxenda is a GLP-1 receptor agonist for diabetes and weight loss. Semaglutide or Ozempic or Wegovy is a GLP-1 receptor agonist for diabetes and weight loss. Tirzepatide or Mounjaro is a GLP-1 receptor agonist and glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide for diabetes and weight loss. Insulin aspart or Novolog is an insulin for diabetes. Insulin Lispro or Humalog or Admelog is an insulin for diabetes. Insulin Detamir or Levemir is an insulin for diabetes. Insulin Glargine or Basaglar or Lantus or Semglee or Toujeo is an insulin for diabetes. Insulin Degludec or Tresiba is an insulin for diabetes. Levothyroxine or Levoxyl or Synthroid is a hormone for hypothyroidism. Armour thyroid or NP thyroid is a hormone for hypothyroidism. Estradiol or estrase is a hormone for hormone replacement therapy or HRT. Norethindrone or heather is a hormone for HRT. Progesterone or prometrium is a hormone for HRT. Ethinyl estradiol with norethindrone or microgestin is a contraceptive for contraception. Ethinyl estradiol with levonorgestrel or DAISY is a contraceptive for contraception. Ethinyl estradiol with desogestrel or Viorel is a contraceptive for contraception. Ethinyl estradiol with drospirenone or Yaz is a contraceptive for contraception. Ethinyl estradiol with etanogestrel or NuvaRing is a contraceptive for contraception. Testosterone or androgel is a hormone for HRT. Finasteride or Proscar or Propecia is a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor for benign prostatic hyperplasia or androgenetic alopecia. Tamsulosin or Flomax is an alpha-1 antagonist for benign prostatic hyperplasia. Oxybutynin or Ditropan is a muscarinic antagonist for overactive bladder. Mirabegron or Myrbetriq is a beta-3 agonist for overactive bladder. Sildenafil or Viagra is a phosphodiesterase type 5 or PDE5 inhibitor for erectile dysfunction and pulmonary hypertension. Tadalafil or Cialis is a PDE5 inhibitor for erectile dysfunction and pulmonary hypertension. Inflammation and immunology drugs. Hydrocortisone or cortisone is a corticosteroid for inflammation. Prednisone or deltazone is a corticosteroid for inflammation. Prednisolone or Orapred is a corticosteroid for inflammation. Methylprednisolone or Medrol is a corticosteroid for inflammation. Triamcinolone or Kenalog is a corticosteroid for inflammation. Clobetasol or Temovate is a corticosteroid for inflammation. Ibuprofen or Advil or Motrin is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug or an NSAID for pain and inflammation. Naproxen or Aleve is an NSAID for pain and inflammation. Meloxicam or Mobic is an NSAID for pain and inflammation. Celecoxib or Celebrex is an NSAID for pain and inflammation. Diclofenac or Voltaren is an NSAID for pain and inflammation. Indomethacin or Indocin is an NSAID for pain and inflammation. Allopurinol or Alloprim is a xanthine oxidase inhibitor for gout. Alendronate or Fosamax is a bisphosphonate for osteoporosis. Hydroxychloroquine or Plaquenil is a disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drug or DMARD for rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. Methotrexate or Rheumatrex is a DMARD for rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis. Infectious disease drugs. Amoxicillin or Amoxil is a penicillin antibiotic for bacterial infections. Amoxicillin with clavulanate or Augmentin is a penicillin antibiotic with a beta-lactamase inhibitor for bacterial infections. Cephalexin or Keflex is a cephalosporin antibiotic for bacterial infections. Doxycycline or Vibramycin is a tetracycline antibiotic for bacterial infections. Azithromycin or Zithromax is a macrolide antibiotic for bacterial infections. Clindamycin or Cleocin is a lincosamide antibiotic for bacterial infections. Ciprofloxacin or Cipro is a fluoroquinolone antibiotic for bacterial infections. Metronidazole or Flagyl is a nitroimidazole antibiotic for bacterial infections. Sulfamethoxazole with trimethoprim or Bactrim is a sulfonamide with a trimethoprim antibiotic for bacterial infections. Nitrofurantoin or Macrobid or Macrodantin is a nitrofuran antibiotic for bacterial infections. Fluconazole or Diflucan is an azole antifungal for fungal infections. Ketoconazole or Nizoral is an azole antifungal for fungal infections. Acyclovir or Zovirax is a DNA polymerase inhibitor for viral infections. Valacyclovir or Valtrex is a DNA polymerase inhibitor for viral infections. Oseltamivir or Tamiflu is a neuraminidase inhibitor for influenza infection and prophylaxis. Nirmatrelvir with ritonavir or Paxlovid is a protease inhibitor for COVID-19 infection. That's the top 200 drugs. In my next video, I'll provide tips, tricks, and techniques to learn, memorize, and retain this information efficiently. As always, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, check out my other content, and I'll see you in the next one.